Get that mud out of here. Veterans don't get special treatment. The inspector's voice cut through the cafe, sharp and humiliating. Earl sat frozen, his service dog pressed against his leg, every eye in the room staring. 30 minutes later, the ground began to shake. 4 Humvees rolled into the lot, engines roaring like thunder. Windows rattled, coffee rippled, and the town held its breath. The doors swung open. A line of Marines stepped out, followed by a commander in dress blues, his stare cold, his presence undeniable. What happened next would turn a small-town cafe into the center of a storm that reached all the way to Washington. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe values like honor, courage, and sacrifice still matter, join us in keeping their legacy alive. The town of Ashwood, North Carolina, was small enough that everyone knew which porch flag was fading and which mailbox leaned too far. At the edge of Main Street stood a modest cafe with a hand-painted sign, Ashwood Cup and Company. Just 5 miles down the road loomed Camp Ashbury, a Marine Corps base that pulsed like the town's second heart. Grace Ann Whitaker, 34, managed the cafe with a quiet strength. She wasn't flashy, and she wasn't loud, but she had turned that little shop into a sanctuary. To many, it felt less like a business and more like a second home. Inside, the cafe carried no polish of city coffeehouses. Wooden tables bore scratches from decades of use. The ceramic mugs were mismatched, some chipped at the rim. Chalk dust clung to the blackboard where each morning Grace scribbled the day's specials. On Wednesdays, in bold white letters, it read Heroes Hour, free coffee for veterans. Customers didn't come for latte art. They came because Grace remembered the details no one else did. She knew which men hated sitting with their backs to the door. She knew which women hadn't touched caffeine since their tours in Iraq. She knew birthdays, return dates, and the long stretches when silence was the only answer a veteran could give. Earl Davidson was one of those who kept coming back. He was a Marine Corps recon veteran in his 50s, broad-shouldered, posture rigid. His voice rarely filled more than a sentence or two. Grace never pressed. She simply poured his coffee black and set it on the corner table he favored. By his side today was Hunter, a Belgian Malinois with a glossy black coat. The vest around his chest read, "Service dog do not pet." Hunter never strayed far. His eyes locked on Earl, his movements precise as if every step was an order. The cafe buzzed that Wednesday morning with its usual rhythm. The bell over the door jingled. Chairs scraped against wood floors. Cups clinked against saucers. Grace moved easily from table to table. Hair tied back, sleeves rolled, a notepad balanced in her palm. For a moment, everything seemed ordinary. Then the air shifted. The front door swung open harder than usual, and a man stepped inside. He wore a navy blazer pressed to perfection, a tie knotted too tight, and an expression that dismissed warmth. A clipboard rested against his chest like a shield. The tag on his lapel read Darren Lowell, State Health Inspector. Grace froze for a beat before greeting him. "Morning, can I help you with something, Inspection?" he said flatly. No smile, no nod, just a single word. He moved without waiting for her approval. His pen tapped the clipboard as he pulled open refrigerator doors, checked expiration dates, and squinted at labels. He ran a finger along the countertop edge, frowning like he expected grime. Each step echoed louder than it should have. Customers grew quiet, following him with their eyes. Grace followed, too, trying to mask her unease. She'd passed plenty of inspections before, but Lowell wasn't here to check boxes. He prowled like he wanted something to break. Then his eyes locked on Hunter. Lowell stopped dead in the middle of the floor. "That animal," he said, his voice cutting through the room. He pointed at the dog. "Violation of state health code. No animals permitted where food is served." Conversations died instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Earl stiffened, hand tightening around his coffee cup. Hunter sat still, ears alert, but unmoving. Grace stepped out from behind the counter. Her voice carried calm she didn't quite feel. "He's a registered service dog. Federal law allows him here." Lowell's jaw twitched. I don't care what vest he's wearing, he snapped. Animals mean dander, saliva, hair. This is a food hazard, unless you want this cafe shut down. That dog goes. The silence deepened. A young couple near the window exchanged nervous glances. A spoon clattered from someone's hand. Every eye turned to Grace. She drew a slow breath. I won't ask a veteran to leave. And I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're welcome to write your report, but you'll be writing that you tried to humiliate a man who served this country. A murmur rippled from the back. Someone whispered, "Damn right." But Lowell didn't back down. His pen scratched across the clipboard in jagged strokes. The tension was still hanging when the bell above the door rang again. A woman stepped in tall, sharp suit, heels clicking against the floor. Her blonde hair was pinned with precision, her leather folder tucked tight under her arm. The embossed badge on its cover marked her as Rebecca Sloan, Regional Manager, Brewline Corporate. She scanned the room with one sweep of her eyes. She saw the inspector. She saw the dog. She saw Grace standing between them. Her expression didn't shift. Her tone was ice. "Grace Whitaker," she said, "you've just violated company compliance policy in front of a state inspector." Grace opened her mouth, but Rebecca didn't pause. "Pack your things. You're finished here." Gasps broke out across the cafe. A fork dropped to a plate. Someone muttered. What Earl set his cup down hard. The sound like a shot. Hunter's ears twitched, but he stayed seated, gaze fixed on his handler. Grace's chest tightened. 6 years of loyalty collapsed into one sentence. Her fingers trembled as she reached behind her back, untying the knot of her apron. The fabric felt heavier than it ever had. She folded it once, placed it on the counter, and looked up. Her eyes moved across the cafe, the chalkboard sign that read, Heroes Hour, the table where Earl sat stone-faced, Hunter pressed to his leg, and the regulars staring with disbelief. She forced the faintest smile. Then she turned to Lena, the young barista frozen behind the espresso machine. Grace leaned close enough for her to hear. "Make sure Earl gets his refill," she whispered, "and give Hunter some water." She straightened, lifted her chin, and walked to the side door. Sunlight poured in as she stepped outside. The door closed behind her, leaving silence thick as smoke in the cafe she had built. No one moved. No one spoke. The sound of her footsteps faded into the street outside, but something unseen had already begun to stir. The cafe's door had barely closed behind Grace when a young man near the counter slid his phone back into his pocket. His hands shook, but the red recording light had caught everything. He uploaded it to Ashwood Community Watch with one line. She was fired for letting a veteran sit with his service dog. The clip caught fire faster than anyone inside expected. Within 10 minutes, 500 people had already shared it. By the 1-hour mark, it had crossed 50,000 views, spreading from town locals to military families stationed in other states. Back inside the cafe, silence pressed hard against the walls. Lena Carter, the youngest barista on staff, tried to keep moving. She poured coffee, wiped counters, even though no one was ordering anymore. Chairs sat empty, mugs cooled, untouched. Earl remained at his table, back straight, eyes forward. His coffee had gone cold, but his grip didn't loosen from the handle. Hunter rested on the floor, ears flicking, every muscle tense, as if waiting for Earl's command that would never come. Customers who had once filled the shop with chatter now whispered nervously. Some slipped out, heads lowered. Others lingered by the windows, phones in hand, refreshing the feed, watching the numbers on the video climb. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Then a sound cut through the quiet. At first faint, like distant thunder rolling over the Carolina hills. It grew heavier, vibrating through the wood floors. Coffee in the mugs began to tremble. The window panes rattled with each deep, approaching growl. Every head turned toward the glass storefront. The rumble became a roar. Then the shapes appeared through morning haze, 4 tan Humvees rolling slow and deliberate down Main Street. Their headlights cut sharp beams through the mist, reflecting off the glass. The convoy pulled into the lot outside the cafe. Tires crunched against gravel. Engines idled. deep and steady, shaking the ground beneath the floorboards. The formation was precise, military in every detail, as if the street itself had become a parade ground. Doors swung open in unison. Boots struck pavement in perfect rhythm. Out of the first Humvee stepped a figure that seemed carved from command itself, Colonel Mason Harrington. His Marine Corps dress blues gleamed under the streetlights. Brass buttons, white gloves, ribbons in full display. Behind him, 24 Marines climbed out, uniforms crisp, expressions hard as steel. They formed a line across the sidewalk, boots clicking into place. The townsfolk pressed against windows and doorframes, eyes wide, phones raised, recording what felt like history unfolding. Inside the cafe, Darren Lowell froze near the pastry case. The clipboard he had clutched like armor now sagged in his hand. His face drained of color. Rebecca Sloan, the corporate manager, stepped back from the counter as if distance might shield her. The cafe bell jingled once. Colonel Harrington entered alone. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, heavy and deliberate. He paused at the center of the room, his gaze sweeping the tables. First at Lena, pale and stiff behind the machine. Then at Earl, who had risen to his feet, shoulders squared. Earl gave a slight nod. The colonel returned it with something sharper, a salute, small but unmistakable. The inspector's lips parted, words stumbling out. I didn't know he was... Harrington's voice carried like steel on stone. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. His words dropped into the silence and stayed there. Lowell's pen slipped from his hand. It clattered to the tile floor. No one bent to pick it up. Rebecca Sloan opened her mouth, then shut it again when Harrington's eyes met hers. The weight of command left no room for protest. The colonel lifted one gloved hand, motioning toward the doorway. Instantly, 2 Marines entered. They moved with quiet precision, walking to the back wall where the corporate logo hung. Without hesitation, they unbolted it, folded the vinyl carefully as if handling a flag. Another Marine stepped forward carrying a wooden board, hand-painted with white lettering. Together they mounted it on the wall above the counter. The words caught the cafe's dim light. Grace's table honor served daily. A hush fell over the room. It wasn't just shock. It was reverence. The kind that tightened throats and stilled hands. For a heartbeat, the cafe no longer felt like a shop. It felt like a chapel. Rebecca Sloan tried again. This is a breach of her words died as Harrington turned his head. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His silence pressed harder than any reprimand. He pivoted back to the center of the room. His voice carried, calm but cutting. This place is more than a cafe. It's where my men came when they had nothing left but silence. It's where dignity was restored without question. And you, his eyes flicked to Sloan, and Lowell forgot that duty doesn't end at the door. The inspector swallowed hard. The manager lowered her eyes. No one dared move. Outside, the Marines held their formation, faces expressionless, yet the weight of their presence filled every corner of Ashwood Cup and Company. Then Lena's phone buzzed. The sharp tone startled her. She glanced down, confusion washing across her face. A message glowed on her screen, stamped with the seal of Camp Ashbury. She read it once, then again, her voice trembling as she spoke aloud. Grace Ann Whitaker report to base headquarters. Today, 1500 hours. Earl's chest rose with a deep breath. Hunter shifted, rising to his feet as if sensing change in the air. Customers looked at one another, whispers breaking out again. Something had moved beyond Ashwood's borders. The story was no longer just a town matter. Across the lot, cameras kept rolling, phones streamed live. Hashtags spread faster than wildfire. Grace's table, honor served daily. Within minutes, the footage would travel far beyond North Carolina, carried into offices and homes across the nation. Meanwhile, Grace sat in her old pickup truck at the edge of her driveway. The keys rested in her hand, but the engine was silent. She hadn't turned them yet. Her apron was gone, but coffee stains still streaked her jeans. Her flannel smelled faintly of roasted beans. She stared at the road ahead. The message from the base replayed in her mind. Report to headquarters. She had driven that road hundreds of times to drop off supplies, muffins, coffee canisters. But this drive felt different. This drive felt final. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The air in the cab felt heavier, as if the whole town pressed against the glass. The morning that began like any other had become a line she couldn't uncross. Grace drew a long breath, slid the key into the ignition, and turned it. The old engine rumbled awake, steady and stubborn. She guided the truck down the road, toward Camp Ashbury, toward whatever waited on the other side of the gate. The gates of Camp Ashbury swung wide, their iron bars painted fresh and gleaming in the afternoon sun. Beyond them stretched a world of order rows of barracks, flagpoles clattering, cadences echoing across the drill fields. Grace guided her truck past the checkpoint, her ID returned with a crisp salute. For a moment, she felt like an intruder in a place she had once only entered as a military wife. She parked near the administration building, a block of brick and glass that seemed to loom taller than she remembered. The air smelled of polish and fuel. Soldiers strode past, their steps in rhythm, voices sharp. Grace tightened her grip on her bag and walked forward, every echo of her boots reminding her she no longer belonged to this world yet was being summoned into it. Colonel Mason Harrington met her at the entrance. Gone were the polished dress blues, the white gloves, the ceremonial sharpness. He wore a simple khaki uniform, sleeves rolled, the look of a man ready to work. His voice was steady, almost kind. "Grace Whitaker, thank you for coming." She shook his hand, the firmness of his grip steadying her nerves. He led her through long corridors lined with portraits of past commanders and framed commendations. They stopped in front of a door with fresh tape on the frame. A temporary plaque read, "Veteran Resilience and Transition Center Pilot Program." He pushed the door open, and Grace stepped into a space still in the process of becoming. The room smelled faintly of paint and cardboard. Folding chairs sat stacked in one corner. A whiteboard leaned against the wall. Markers scattered on the floor. Volunteers moved quietly, arranging therapy mats and unpacking boxes labeled donated supplies. In the center of the room, a golden retriever puppy practiced simple commands, its red vest reading, "In training." From the back stepped a young woman, sleeves pulled down to cover burn scars etched along her forearm and jaw. She hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Is that her name tag read Tiffany Alvarez?" At her side trotted the puppy, tail wagging cautiously. Tiffany's voice trembled but carried hope. "You're the woman from the video. Right, if you opened a place like this, maybe I could try again. Maybe I could sit with people without panicking." Grace's chest tightened. She glanced at Harrington, who gave a small nod. He didn't need to explain. Tiffany's words said more than a dozen reports could. Grace crouched slightly, extending her hand to the puppy, its nose pressed into her palm, warm and steady. She looked up, eyes glassy but firm. "Yes, we're opening this." Harrington's gaze never left her face. "You don't need credentials to build what you've already built. You created a haven without even knowing it. We need you to direct this program. Grace, shape it, guide it, make it real." His tone softened. "Will you do it?" Her throat caught, but her answer came clear. "I will." She didn't add conditions. She didn't ask what the title meant. She simply knew. The first weeks moved fast. Flyers went up around Ashwood. Soldiers returning from deployment began drifting in. Some came with spouses. Some came alone. Grace set a coffee urn in the corner and wrote names in a notebook. Veterans found seats on folding chairs, some speaking, others only listening. Tiffany showed up every Tuesday, sketchbook in hand, filling pages with drawings of hands, dogs, and quiet rooms. But the program's growth drew attention. 1 month in, the tone shifted. A team of federal auditors arrived, suits pressed, clipboards in hand. They carried the air of judgment before stepping through the door. They asked for rosters, schedules, compliance codes. They measured coffee temperatures and checked the seals on the donated water filters. Every note felt like a verdict waiting to fall. Finally, Their lead inspector set his pen down and looked directly at Grace. Mrs. Whitaker, what certifications qualify you to counsel veterans suffering from trauma? His voice was even. His gaze sharp. The room stilled, all eyes turning to her. Grace opened her notebook. Pages filled with names and short notes spilled under her fingers. She didn't flinch. 47 veterans have walked through this door. 70% returned in the second week. We've handled 5 crisis episodes safely. No hospitalizations required. Her voice held no bravado, only steadiness. I don't have letters after my name, but I have consistency and kindness and proof it matters. The inspector's lips tightened. His pen hovered, then pressed against the paper. The sound of scribbling filled the silence. But before he could ask another question, a loud crack echoed from the training field outside. A rifle salute in the distance. Part of a drill. The sound rattled the windows. Inside, one of the younger veterans jolted violently. He was barely 20, skin pale, eyes wide. His breathing turned sharp, shallow. His hands clawed at the chair as if bracing for impact. No, no, not again. He gasped, sweat already dripping down his temple. Chairs scraped as people backed away in alarm. Tiffany froze, the puppy tugging at her sleeve. The auditors looked on, pens stilled, unsure whether to intervene. Grace was already moving. Hunter, she called. The Malinois leapt forward from Earl's side, weaving through chairs with practiced precision. Tiffany's pup followed, yipping softly as if echoing the command. Grace knelt beside the young soldier, lowering herself to his level. Hunter pressed against his legs, grounding him with steady weight. The golden retriever nestled at his side, tail thumping gently. Grace's voice was calm, firm. Breathe with me. 4 in, hold, 7, out, 8, again. You're here. You're safe. The soldier's breath stumbled, then caught the rhythm. His shoulders stopped shaking. Tears slid down his cheeks, but his eyes began to focus again. Hunter rested his chin on the young man's knee, a living anchor pulling him back from the spiral. The room held still, as if no one dared break the fragile moment. Grace guided him into the small, quiet room, dim lights already waiting. She stayed until his breath steadied, until his voice whispered a trembling thank you. Only then did she step back. When she returned, the auditors were still there. Their clipboards hung at their sides. None had written a word. One cleared his throat, but no question came. They stood silent, witnesses to something no credential could replicate. Colonel Harrington stepped into the doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with conviction. He didn't address the inspectors. He simply met Grace's gaze, a silent affirmation passing between them. The trial had come, and she had passed, not with a policy, but with presence. The auditors filed out slowly, leaving behind the sound of Hunter's breathing and the faint scratch of Tiffany's pencil against paper. Grace exhaled, her shoulders heavy but steady. The center wasn't just surviving anymore. It was proving itself in fire. 1 week later, the letter arrived on crisp federal stationery. The seal of the Department of Defense gleamed in gold at the top. Inside, the words struck like a bell. The Ashbury Veteran Resilience and Transition Center has been selected for national model consideration. The announcement spread quickly. Local newspapers splashed the headline across their front pages. National outlets picked up the story, framing it as a grassroots miracle. Grace, however, sat quietly at her kitchen table, the letter folded in her hands, still unsure how she had become the face of something so large. The following morning, she returned to the corner cafe she once managed. It had changed in her absence. The sign above the door now read, "Corner of Grace," painted by local veterans on reclaimed wood. Inside, walls were lined with photographs of service members who had passed through its doors. Lena Carter stood behind the counter, grinning as she slid a steaming mug toward her former boss. "People are calling you a legend now," she teased. Grace smiled softly, shaking her head. "I'm not a legend. I just poured coffee. But there was no denying how far her simple act had traveled. At the center, attendance grew every week. Veterans brought friends, families joined workshops, local schools organized donation drives. What began as a fragile pilot project was turning into a heartbeat for the community. Then came the call from Washington, an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference. Grace hesitated. She had never spoken to a ballroom filled with strangers, let alone generals and policymakers. Still, she packed her bag with a single blazer, Jacob's old watch, and the notebook she had carried from the cafe. The ballroom in D.C. glittered under chandeliers. White tablecloths stretched across rows of tables. Cameras framed the stage from every angle. Grace waited at the edge of the platform, palms damp, heart pounding. When her name was announced, she stepped into the light. Her voice was small at first, but clear. I am not a general. I am not a doctor. I managed a small cafe near a base. I served coffee. I listened. The room leaned closer. She took a breath. And I learned this: veterans do not need to be fixed. They need to be seen. Applause erupted, rolling through the hall like thunder. At the back, Colonel Harrington stood tall, his arms folded, pride flickering across his eyes. Near him, Earl Davidson remained stiff and silent, his silver star pinned neatly on his chest, tears threatening to fall but never breaking his composure. Grace paused, letting the moment settle. One day I lost my job because I refused to throw out a man and his service dog. That day changed everything. But it was never about coffee. It was about dignity. The applause rose again, long and unrelenting. After the speech, as the ballroom emptied into clusters of conversation, an older man approached her quietly. His suit was simple, his beard white, his eyes gentle behind thin glasses. He carried a worn photograph, edges curled from years in a wallet. You don't remember me, do you? He asked. Grace studied his face but couldn't place him. He held out the photo. It showed Jacob Whitaker, her husband, sitting on a bench outside the cafe years earlier. Next to him stood the man now before her, in uniform, fresh from discharge. You poured me a cup of coffee that day, he said softly. You didn't ask questions. You just smiled. It was the first time I felt like a person again. Her breath caught. Fingers trembled as she accepted the photo. Words failed her, but the man simply patted her shoulder and walked away, leaving the picture in her hand. She clutched it close, the weight of Jacob's memory pressing warm against her chest. When she returned to Ashwood, the town held a modest gathering at the community hall. Children waved small flags, veterans shook her hand, and neighbors filled the tables with homemade pies. Grace spoke only briefly. This is not about me. It is about us, about what we protect in each other. The crowd applauded, but she felt the deeper meaning settling quietly into their hearts. That night she went back to the center, now bustling even after hours. A few veterans sat near the fire pit outside, their conversations low and steady. Inside, the walls bore a growing collection of photographs, moments captured from therapy sessions, community events, and homecomings. Grace added 2 more to the display. The first was the snapshot from the conference, the crowd on their feet applauding her words. The second was the old cafe photo, Jacob smiling, his boots propped, the soldier beside him standing tall. Beneath them, she pinned a handwritten card: honor grows where kindness is steady. The building was quiet when the door opened. A young man lingered in the threshold, eyes darting nervously. His hands fidgeted against his jacket, shoulders hunched as if expecting rejection. Is this the place for people like me? His voice cracked, carrying the weight of unspoken fear. Grace stepped forward, her smile gentle but sure. No, she said, this is the place for all of us. The young man's eyes widened, a flicker of relief breaking through. He stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars faint above Ashwood. Inside, the light from the photo wall glowed steady, illuminating faces past and present. Grace stood among them, not as a legend, not as a leader, but as a keeper of dignity. The music of quiet conversations filled the hall, mixing with the soft thump of dogs' tails against the floor. And in that stillness, the legacy she had never sought revealed itself alive, growing, steady as the honor it carried, fade out. The story ended not with applause, but with an open door. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that's just as powerful and captivating, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about duty and justice.